My name is Clara, and exactly 1 year ago, I was at the peak of what should have been the happiest moment of my life. I was 2 weeks away from marrying Lucas, the man I believed to be the love of my life. However, in my pocket, I carried a secret that seemed to weigh a ton, the truth about my 10 million reis inheritance. An inheritance that never existed. That night, during what should have been a celebratory dinner, I decided to tell the truth. His reaction not only shattered my dreams but, fortunately, saved my life. If you've ever felt you needed to diminish yourself or hide a part of yourself to be loved, then you'll understand my story. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a situation where honesty seemed more dangerous than a lie? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to follow how a lie I didn't create almost cost me everything, and how the truth, however painful, set me free. My relationship with Lucas began like a romantic comedy script. I was a freelance graphic designer, passionate about books, strong coffee, and the tranquility of my small apartment. He was a rising financial consultant, charming, ambitious, and with a smile that seemed to promise a bright future. We met at an art gallery, a cliché we both loved. He was admiring an abstract painting with the same intensity as I was, and the conversation flowed as if we had known each other for years. Lucas was everything I thought I wanted. He was attentive, remembered small details. He supported me in my career, even if he didn't fully understand why I preferred the instability of freelance work to the security of a corporate job. You have a free spirit, Clara, he would say, it's one of the things I love most about you. And I believed him. Our first year was a whirlwind of happiness. Romantic dinners, weekend trips to the mountains, long conversations about our dreams. My dream was simple, to expand my design studio, maybe hire one more person, and continue living a creative and independent life. Lucas's dream was bigger. He wanted to be a partner in the firm before 35, buy a huge house in the suburbs, and build an empire for our future family. I admired his ambition, even if sometimes it seemed to overshadow the simplicity of my own desires. The marriage proposal happened on a rainy night, at our favorite restaurant. It was perfect. Intimate, sincere, and full of promises. I cried. Said yes, without hesitation. The ring was dazzling, a diamond that seemed too big for my hand, but he insisted. You deserve the best, my love, he said. Lucas wasn't the problem, not at first. His family was. The Medeiros were the opposite of mine. My parents, retired university professors, lived a modest and intellectual life. Success, for them, was measured in books read and contributions to the community. For the Medeiros, success had a bank statement. Lucas's father, Mr. Alberto, was a ruthless businessman who built his fortune from scratch and never let anyone forget it. His mother, Mrs. Sylvia, was the social matriarch, a woman whose identity was intertwined with the family's status, the jewelry she wore, and the charity events she presided over. They welcomed me with an enthusiasm that, at first, seemed warm, but soon revealed itself to be evaluative. At our first dinner at the Medeiros mansion, the questions weren't about my hobbies or my passion for design. They were about where my family was from, what my background was, and, the most subtle of all, what were my future prospects. I answered truthfully, talking about my work and my parents, and saw a glimmer of polite disappointment in Mrs. Sylvia's eyes. It was the first time I felt inadequate, like a piece of decor that didn't match the rest of the room. It's a horrible feeling, isn't it? To feel like you're being measured and weighed, not by who you are, but by what you have. Or where you come from. Who here has had an encounter with in-laws that felt more like a job interview or a credit investigation? Leave a comment telling me your story, because I know I'm not alone in this. The story of my inheritance didn't start with me. It started with a distant great-aunt, Aunt Ophelia, an eccentric figure from my mother's side of the family whom I barely knew. When she passed away, she left a complicated will that took years to resolve. The truth is, she left most of her assets to animal charities and a small, but significant, amount to each grandniece and nephew, including me. It was enough to pay off my student loan and create a small emergency fund. I was immensely grateful. But family gossip, as always, was grander than reality. The story that began to circulate, fueled by a cousin who loved to exaggerate, was that Aunt Ophelia was secretly a real estate magnate and that each of us had inherited a fortune. The number that stuck in the collective imagination was 10 million reis. It was such an absurd fantasy that I didn't even bother to correct it. In my family, where money was never a central topic, it was just an inside joke, a funny story to tell at Sunday lunches. The problem started when this joke reached Lucas's ears. I mentioned it in passing, laughing, during one of our first dates. Oh, yes, according to my cousin, I'm a secret millionaire heiress, I said, rolling my eyes. I expected him to laugh along, but instead, he leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with sudden interest. Seriously? How much are we talking about? He asked. The lightness of the joke disappeared. I tried to explain it was an exaggeration, a family legend, but he seemed to have only heard the words heiress and millionaire. I should have been firmer. I should have categorically denied it right then and there. But I was young, in love, and for the first time, I saw a different kind of admiration in his eyes. An admiration that, I later realized, wasn't for me, but for my supposed financial potential. So, I did what many people do in uncomfortable situations, I deflected. "Oh, it's complicated, the will is still being finalized," I mumbled, changing the subject. And with that small omission, the seed of the lie was planted. When Lucas introduced me to his family, he introduced me as Clara, a talented designer, who also comes from a family with significant resources. The change in the Medeiros attitude was instant and frightening. The polite disappointment in Mrs. Sylvia's eyes was replaced by a gleam of approval. Mr. Alberto, who barely spoke to me before, now pulled me into conversations about investment strategies for young heirs. They weren't seeing me anymore. They were seeing a number. 10 million reais. The lie grew and took on a life of its own, fueled by their greed and expectations. Mrs. Sylvia began including me in her social circles, introducing me as Lucas's fiancé, a lovely young woman who will soon join us on a more comfortable footing. They began planning the wedding not as the small, intimate ceremony I dreamed of, but as a grand social event, worthy of both families' status. Every conversation was punctuated by references to my future contribution to the couple's assets. "With your inheritance and Lucas's ambition, you'll be unstoppable," Mr. Alberto declared at a dinner, raising a toast to me. I smiled, but inside, panic began to set in. The lie was a runaway train, and I was tied to the tracks. It's incredible how a small omission can turn into an avalanche. I felt trapped. If I told the truth, I feared losing not only their approval, but perhaps even Lucas, who seemed so proud of my position. If I continued the charade, I would be building my future on a foundation of sand. Have you ever felt trapped in a lie you didn't start, but felt compelled to maintain? How did you deal with it? Share in the comments, because the pressure to keep up appearances can be overwhelming. Living with this lie was like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. On the outside, everything seemed fine, but with every step, the pain and discomfort grew. Wedding preparations became a minefield. My dreams of an outdoor ceremony, with wildflowers and close friends, were discarded by Mrs. Sylvia in favor of the city's most expensive banquet hall, with a guest list of 400 that included all the business elite they knew. "Darling, we need an event that reflects the union of two important families," she would say, and the word important hung in the air, always linked to that phantom fortune. Lucas, who once supported my free spirit, was now fully aligned with his mother's plans. "Come on, love, it'll be amazing. Think of the connections we can make. It's an investment in our future," he argued, using the same business language as his father. When I tried to express my discomfort, he accused me of being naive or not understanding how the world works. The man who fell in love with me in an art gallery was disappearing, replaced by a mini Alberto Medeiros. My breaking point came during a meeting with the wedding planner, a very expensive woman hired by Mrs. Sylvia. We were discussing the budget, and the numbers were astronomical. I felt physically ill. "I don't know if we can afford all this," I said softly, looking at Lucas for support. Mrs. Sylvia let out a condescending chuckle. "Don't be silly, dear. Consider it an advance. As soon as your inheritance is released, all this will be pocket change." She winked at me, as if we were accomplices in a grand plan. In that moment, I saw the trap clearly. They weren't just spending money I didn't have. They were indebting me based on a fantasy, trapping me in a way that would be impossible to escape. That night, I couldn't sleep. Anxiety was a physical presence in my chest. I looked at my engagement ring, which now felt like a shackle. I remembered my father's words, a man of few words, but great wisdom. "Clara," he once told me, "the only foundation that sustains a life is truth. Everything else is scenery, and scenery crumbles." I knew what I needed to do. I couldn't marry Lucas under this cloud of deception. It wasn't fair to him, and it certainly wasn't fair to me. I deserved to be loved for who I was, a graphic designer with a heart full of simple dreams, not for an imaginary bank account. I needed to tell the truth, regardless of the consequences. If his love was real, he would understand. He would stand by me, and we would face his family together. If not, well, it was better to know now. I called him and asked for dinner, just the two of us, at my apartment. "I need to talk to you about something important," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "Something about the inheritance." On the other end of the line, there was a pause, and then his voice, full of an animation that chilled me to the bone, "Finally. Has the money been released?" My heart sank. In that instant, I knew the conversation we would have wouldn't be about understanding and support. It would be about the collapse of an illusion. And I needed to be ready for what came next. Making the decision to blow up your own world is the most terrifying and, at the same time, most liberating thing there is. Have you ever reached a breaking point where you knew you couldn't live a lie anymore, even if the truth could cost you everything? What gave you the courage to take that step? I'm genuinely curious to read your stories in the comments. Your courage can inspire someone else who is going through the same thing right now. Lucas arrived at my apartment that night with a bottle of the most expensive champagne I had ever seen. His smile was wide, his eyes gleamed with an excitement that broke my heart. He wasn't there to listen to me, he was there to celebrate. He popped the bottle with a festive pop, filled 2 glasses, and handed me one. To us, my love, he toasted. To our future. A future without limits. I couldn't drink. The glass trembled in my hand. This was the moment. There wouldn't be a better moment. Lucas, we need to talk, I began, my voice sounding weaker than I intended. It's not what you're thinking. His expression changed, the joy replaced by cautious confusion. What do you mean? What happened? Any problem with the inventory? I took a deep breath, gathering the courage that had brought me here. The inheritance, the 10 million story, it's not real. The words came out, and the silence that followed was the heaviest I had ever experienced. It was as if sound had been sucked out of the universe. Lucas's face went through a series of transformations in seconds. First, confusion. Then, a spark of disbelief, as if I were making a bad joke. And then, when he saw the seriousness on my face, the mask fell. The charming and attentive man disappeared, and in his place appeared a stranger. A man with cold eyes and a mouth twisted into an expression of contempt. What did you say? He hissed, each word dripping venom. I explained everything. The story of Aunt Ophelia, my cousin's gossip, the actual amount I received, which had already been used to pay off my debts. I explained how the story grew beyond my control, how I felt pressured by his family, how I was terrified to tell the truth and lose him. I poured out my heart, hoping, against all hope, for a glimmer of understanding. I received none. Are you telling me, he said, his voice dangerously calm, that you lied to me all this time? That you let me introduce you to my family, make plans, build our future, based on a fraud? I didn't actively lie, Lucas, it was a misunderstanding that. Don't give me misunderstanding, Clara, he exploded, his face red with anger. You're a liar. A swindler. You used me. The irony of the accusation was so overwhelming that I almost laughed. He was accusing me of using him, when it was clear that the situation was exactly the opposite. Truth is a double-edged sword. It can liberate, but it can also destroy. In that moment, I saw the true face of the man I was going to marry. Have you ever had such a brutal moment of clarity that it changed your perception of someone forever? Share that experience in the comments. What was it like to see someone's mask fall? The argument that followed was the ugliest of my life. Lucas paced back and forth in my small apartment, gesticulating wildly, alternating between accusations and lamentations. But his focus wasn't on our relationship, the broken trust, or the love we supposedly had. His focus was on the money. Do you have any idea what this means? How ridiculous I'm going to look. My father, my mother, they invested in us. They were counting on this. The word invested hit me like a punch. That's how they saw our marriage, an investment. And I was an asset that had just turned out to be rotten. He grabbed his phone. I have to call my parents. They need to know the wedding is cancelled. Cancelled? The word came out of my mouth in a whisper. You're ending everything, just like that, without even trying to understand my side? He stopped. And looked at me as if I were an insect. Understand what? That you're a fraud? There's no us, Clara. There never was. I built my plans with an heiress, not with a freelance designer who can barely pay her rent. The cruelty in his voice was surgical. Every word was chosen to cut me, to diminish me, to put me in my place. And then, something inside me snapped. The sadness and fear that had overwhelmed me gave way to a cold, clear anger. The anger of someone who finally understands their own worth. You're right, Lucas, I said, my voice now firm and controlled. There is no us. Because the us you wanted was a business partnership. And I, fortunately, don't have the capital you require. He was shocked by my change in attitude, expecting tears and pleas. But I had no more tears for him. I took the engagement ring off my finger, the ring that now looked like a prop from a bad play, and placed it on the table. Here it is. You can have your investment back. Sometimes, the lowest point in your life becomes the foundation upon which you build your strength. Have you ever had a moment where you were pushed to the limit and, instead of breaking, found a strength you didn't know you had? Tell me about it. These stories of resilience are the ones that most need to be shared. Lucas's exit was as dramatic as his outburst. He grabbed the ring, gave me one last look of pure disgust, and slammed the door with a force that made the pictures on the wall tremble. And then, silence. A deep, absolute silence. I stood in the middle of my living room, the smell of expensive champagne still in the air, and untouched glass on the table. I should have been devastated, heartbroken, crying on the floor. And a part of me was the part that loved the man I thought Lucas was. But a much larger part of me felt relief. A deep, overwhelming relief, as if 1,000-pound weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was free. Free from the lie, free from the Medeiros expectations, free from a man who clearly didn't love me for who I was. The pain of loss was real, but the clarity of my salvation was even stronger. I hadn't lost a fiancé, I had escaped a sentence. The wedding wasn't cancelled because of my confession. The wedding was cancelled because it was never real to begin with. And thanking God for that was the first true prayer I had made in a long time. That moment of relief amidst the pain was a turning point. It taught me that sometimes, the greatest blessing comes disguised as a broken heart. Have you ever experienced this? An ending that seemed tragic, but turned out to be your greatest liberation? I really want to read about your thank God moments. In the comments, the next 24 hours were a blur of orchestrated chaos. The phone started ringing even before the sun rose. First, it was Mrs. Sylvia. Her voice, usually sweet and controlled, was a high-pitched shriek of fury. She didn't ask how I was. She accused me of humiliating her family, of destroying her son's reputation, of being the worst kind of social climber. We welcomed you. We gave you our time, our status. And this is how you repay us? With lies? I listened in silence, letting the torrent of hatred wash over me. When she finally paused to breathe, I said calmly, Mrs. Sylvia, I didn't lie about who I am. You fell in love with a fantasy you created yourselves. And I hung up. Then came Mr. Alberto. He was more direct, colder. There was no emotion in his voice, just business. He spoke about the financial and reputational damages I had caused. He talked about the non-refundable deposits for the wedding, about the signed contracts, about Lucas's loss of credibility in their social circle. He informed me that his lawyers would be in touch to discuss compensation for losses incurred due to your deliberate fraud. It was a clear threat, designed to intimidate me, to make me feel small and powerless. But, strangely, it didn't work. The woman he was trying to scare no longer existed. The hardest part was dealing with the practical side of the disaster. Canceling the wedding. Calling the vendors, the venue, the band. Each call was a small humiliation, a repetition of the story. Yes, the wedding was cancelled. No, it won't be rescheduled. Yes, I understand the deposit is non-refundable. And then, I had to call my parents. Telling them the engagement was over was painful, not because I regretted my decision, but because I knew it would hurt them. My father listened to the whole story in silence. When I finished, he just said, "The trash took itself out, my daughter. We're on our way." And in those few words, I felt more love and support than in 2 years with the Medeiros family. Dealing with the consequences of a big life decision can be overwhelming. Who was your safe harbor when the storm hit? Tag that person in the comments. Or share a story about how someone's support made all the difference in your toughest moment. My parents arrived that afternoon and found me amidst boxes, packing away every trace of Lucas that existed in my apartment. My mother hugged me for a long time, saying nothing, just letting me feel that I wasn't alone. My father, a practical man, started making coffee and listing the things we needed to sort out. They didn't judge me. They didn't ask me why I didn't tell the truth sooner. They just saw me, saw my pain and my strength, and offered me shelter. It was in that cocoon of unconditional love that I began to process everything. I realized that the Medeiros family operated like a money cult. They didn't value people, they valued assets. Lucas was no different. He wasn't in love with me, he was in love with the idea of me, the Clara 2.0, the version with a millionaire inheritance. The real Clara, the designer who loved art and books, was, in his words, a little freelance designer. And the truth is, I would never be happy trying to be someone I wasn't. I would be living in a gilded cage, always afraid they would discover my feathers weren't real gold. The biggest revelation, however, was about myself. I understood that, in a way, I was also complicit. I allowed the lie to grow because a part of me liked the validation it brought. I liked being approved by the Medeiros, even knowing the approval was false. It was a hard lesson to swallow. I had compromised my own truth in exchange for superficial acceptance. And that was a betrayal of myself, perhaps greater than Lucas's. Self-knowledge often comes from our biggest mistakes. What was the hardest, yet most important, lesson you learned about yourself after a crisis? Sharing our flaws can be as powerful. as sharing our victories. Share your experience in the comments. The legal storm Mr. Alberto promised never came. Most likely, his lawyer advised him that they had no basis for a lawsuit and that the publicity of such a case, a rich family trying to sue a middle-class woman for not being rich enough, would be a public relations disaster. But the threat served a purpose. It cut the last ties. I changed my phone number, blocked them all on social media, and began the long process of erasing the Medeiros from my life. One night, a week after the breakup, my best friend, Anna, came to visit. She found me sitting on the floor, surrounded by photo albums of Lucas and me. I wasn't crying. I was studying the photos, trying to find the exact moment when the light in his eyes changed. You won't find it, Anna said softly, sitting beside me. Because maybe it was never light. Maybe it was just the reflection of the gold he thought you had. Her phrase was like a ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds. She was right. I was mourning an illusion, not a reality. And with that realization, I closed the photo album for the last time and put it in the donation box. It was time to move on. Friends who tell us the truth, even when it hurts, are treasures. Do you have a friend like that? Someone who helped you see the reality of a situation? Give them a shout out in the comments. Let's spread some love for true friendship. The following months were dedicated to a single project, the rebuilding of Clara. I immersed myself in work like never before. But this time, it was different. I was no longer working to prove my worth to anyone, nor to finance a lifestyle that wasn't mine. I was working out of pure passion. My creativity, once suffocated by anxiety and pressure, exploded. I took on projects that challenged me, that scared me a little. I created a new visual identity for a non-profit organization that helped at-risk girls enter the tech market. I developed the launch campaign for a small independent publishing house. Each project was a brick in the reconstruction of my professional self-esteem. I also started doing things I had abandoned during my relationship with Lucas. I went back to pottery classes, getting my hands dirty with clay and feeling the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and tangible from nothing. I started exploring the city on foot, aimlessly, discovering small bookstores, hidden cafes, and independent art galleries. I was rediscovering the woman I was before trying to fit into the Medeiros mold. And I was really enjoying her company. One of the most important things I did was seek therapy. I needed to understand why I had allowed that situation to happen, why the approval of people like them had been so important to me. In sessions, I unearthed old insecurities, the need to please that many women carry from childhood. I learned to set boundaries, to say no without feeling guilty. I learned that my worth was not tied to anyone's opinion, whether it was a fiancé, a rich family, or a client. My worth was intrinsic. It was mine. The journey of rediscovering yourself after a toxic relationship is unique for everyone. What did you do to reconnect with yourself? Was it a new hobby, a trip, therapy, or something completely different? Your ideas can inspire someone who is starting this journey now. About 6 months after the breakup, I received an unexpected email. It was from an old college colleague, Daniel. He was working as a curator at a small, but respected, contemporary art museum. He had seen my recent work online and was impressed. "Clara, your style has evolved so much," he wrote. "There's an authenticity, a strength in it that's new. We're planning an exhibition on new voices in graphic design, and I'd love to include some of your pieces." Reading that email was such a pure and genuine moment of validation that it left me breathless. It wasn't about money, status, or connections. It was about my work, my art, my voice. Daniel and I met for coffee to discuss the exhibition. The conversation was easy, stimulating. We talked about art, design, books, life. He had kind eyes and an easy laugh. He listened to me with an interest that didn't seem to have a hidden agenda. He didn't ask about my family, my past, or my prospects. He asked about my inspirations, my passions, my fears as an artist. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely seen. Sometimes, the universe sends us people at the exact moment we need them. Have you ever had an encounter that felt like a sign that you were on the right path? Share that story of synchronicity in the comments. The exhibition was a success. Seeing my work hanging on museum walls, being appreciated by strangers, was one of the most gratifying experiences of my life. On opening night, my parents and Anna were there, their faces beaming with pride. Daniel introduced me to other artists, critics, collectors. I felt part of a community based on talent and mutual respect, not on bank accounts. At the end of the night, Daniel found me near one of my pieces, a poster I had created for the Tech Girls NGO. The slogan was, "Build your own empire." He smiled. "You know, I think this piece is a self-portrait," he said. I looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Because that's exactly what you did, isn't it? You built your own empire, on your own terms. And it's the most impressive thing I've ever seen. In that moment, I realized that happiness wasn't a diamond ring or a house in the suburbs. Happiness was being admired for the strength you found in your own ruins, being recognized for your resilience is a powerful feeling. Who in your life recognized your strength at a moment when you most needed to hear it? Let's celebrate those people. ##### Act 5, the echo of the past and the peace of the present. Almost a year after our breakup, the past knocked on my door unexpectedly. I was in my studio, which now occupied a small commercial space and had an intern, Julia, when I received a message on LinkedIn. It was from a woman named Beatriz, Lucas's younger brother's fiancé. The message was hesitant. "Clara, I know this is strange, but I really need to talk to you. It's about the Medeiros family. I feel like I'm making a terrible mistake." My first instinct was to ignore it. I owed that family nothing. But the mention of making a terrible mistake resonated with me. I met Beatriz at a cafe. She was young, beautiful, and visibly shaken. She told me she was being subjected to the same treatment as I was. The pressure to be the perfect fiancé, the grandiose wedding plans she didn't want, the constant references to her potential to fit into the family. "They're obsessed with the story of an inheritance my grandmother might leave me," she said, her eyes full of tears. "They tell me I shouldn't make the same dishonest mistake you made." Hearing her story was like watching a replay of my own life. The same trap, the same golden bait. They hadn't learned anything. They had just found a new victim. I spent 2 hours with Beatriz, not to badmouth the Medeiros, but to tell my story. The truth. I talked about the pressure, the loss of identity, and, most importantly, about the relief and freedom I found on the other side. "The only question you need to ask yourself," I told her, "is whether your fiancé loves you enough to defend you from his own family. If he loves you for who you are, not for what you might come to have." Giving advice based on our most painful experiences can be a powerful form of healing. Have you ever had the opportunity to help someone who was going through a similar situation to yours? What was that experience like? A few weeks later, Beatriz sent me a message. "I ended everything. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But for the first time in months, I can breathe. Thank you." That message gave me a sense of closure I didn't know I needed. My pain hadn't been in vain. It had become a beacon for someone else. Meanwhile, my relationship with Daniel slowly blossomed, organically and healthily. There were no games, no pressures. Just two people getting to know each other, respecting each other, and admiring each other. He loved my independence, celebrated my conquests, and comforted me in my insecurities. With him, I learned that true love doesn't try to mold you. It gives you space to grow. One day, we were walking in the park when he stopped and said, "You know, I never asked you much about your ex. But I want you to know one thing. Any man who let you go didn't deserve you in the first place. Because your worth, Clara, is dazzling. And only a fool wouldn't see that." He didn't need to know the details, the fake inheritance, the humiliation. He saw me. And that was all that mattered. Healthy love looks different for everyone, but it often has to do with being seen and accepted as you are. What does healthy love mean to you? Describe that feeling or an experience in the comments. The peace I found wasn't a state of constant happiness. It was something deeper. It was the tranquility of knowing who I was. It was the confidence that I could handle any storm, because I had already survived the worst of them. It was the joy of work that fulfilled me, of friendships that sustained me, and of a love that nourished me, instead of consuming me. One day, by chance, I saw Lucas. I was leaving a meeting and he was entering an expensive restaurant with a group of men in suits. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw a flicker of recognition, followed by a scowl of contempt, before he turned away. And I felt nothing. No pain, no anger, no pang of nostalgia. He was just a stranger, a ghost of a life that was no longer mine. I kept walking, with a smile on my face, towards my own life, a life built on truth. No longer feeling pain from something that once broke you is an incredible milestone in healing. Do you remember the moment you realized that a past pain no longer had power over you? Share that victory. Today, a year after that night that changed everything, I'm sitting in my studio. Sunlight streams through the window, illuminating the sketches of a new project on my desk. The studio has grown. I now have 2 employees and a list of clients who respect me for my talent, not for my last name or an imaginary bank account. The empire I built is not made of money, but of creativity, resilience, and truth. My relationship with Daniel is the easiest and, at the same time, deepest thing in my life. Last month, we moved into an apartment together. It's a place full of books, art, and laughter. There are no games, no unrealistic expectations. Just partnership. Last week, he gave me a gift. It was a small ceramic sculpture he made himself, of a bird breaking free from a broken cage. "That's you," he said. And I cried, this time, tears of pure joy and gratitude. I learned that the most valuable inheritance we can receive doesn't come from a will. It comes from the lessons we learn, the strength we discover within ourselves, and the love we cultivate based on honesty. My legacy won't be a fortune left in a bank, it will be proof that it's possible to rebuild a life from the ruins, stronger and more authentic than before. The story of my fake inheritance became an anecdote, a story I tell to remind myself how far I've come. The lie almost destroyed me, but the truth, however brutal it was, set me free in a way I never could have imagined. It saved me from a marriage that would have been a prison, from a family that saw me as a financial balance sheet, and from a man who wasn't capable of loving me. Thank God, he tried to cancel the wedding on the spot. It was the biggest favor anyone has ever done for me. If you're watching this and feel trapped in a situation that compromises who you are, if you're afraid to tell the truth because of the consequences, I want you to know one thing: the scenery on the other side of fear is freedom. The pain of an ending is temporary, but the pain of living a life that isn't yours is a perpetual sentence. Choose yourself. Always. My journey was about discovering my own worth, independent of external validation. Now I want to hear from you. Looking at your life, what is your true legacy? Not in terms of money or possessions, but in terms of strength, resilience, and the lessons you've learned. What do you want people to remember about you? Leave your answer in the comments below. Let's create a chain of stories about what truly matters. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are stronger than you think, and you deserve a love that celebrates exactly who you are. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time.